So I'm going to tell you about the research writing unit. I'm going to share some goals, and then we'll look at the big picture. What is supposed to be in this piece of writing, and what are some possible topics? So some of the goals here, you want to look at a problem or issue of global significance, and you want to think critically about it and figure out, what has led to the problem, what is the problem exactly, and what are some ways to address or solve the problem. And so part of that is going to be, practicing some critical thinking. Also, it's going to involve looking for information from other sources. And then more specifically, you all have done citations before in text, and we're excited, so we want to be able to cite information that we're finding and ultimately integrate information from other sources into your own writing in a way that feels natural. So let's look at the assignment itself, and this is linked in its learning. So the first thing is to think about a problem or issue with global significance. Now, I say global, but it could be, you could take more of a national focus or even local. It could be a problem that's showing up in this district, for example, and that's really your area of focus here. And you want to, when you're writing about it, state it as a problem. So if you write about prisons, for example, you say prisons, that's not a problem in itself, but if you say overpopulation in prisons, or that prisons aren't meeting the goals that we as a society want them to be meeting, that's a problem. So big picture here too. So think about the overall paper here. These are the required elements in it. And this also might serve as a kind of general outline for the way you write. So you could open the paper with a specific example of the problem. One person's story. Again, to return to the prisons example, maybe you tell the person of one person who was incarcerated, what happened to him or to her, and then use that as an example of the problem you're talking about. Then you want to define the problem, more broadly, but with that specific example in mind. Trace what's led to the problem, and then identify one or more ways to address or solve the problem. And the solutions don't have to be original. You don't have to come up with them yourself, although you can. You may simply be presenting solutions that other people have proposed. And we'll talk more about the sources later here. You want at least 4. And then I'm going to ask you to use the databases here. We'll get into that a different day. So let's look at some possible topics here. Also in this document, there are some steps to follow. I'll be leading you through these, but if you want a preview of where we're headed, this is it. So look down here. Let's look at some possible topics. So the coronavirus, hard to escape that topic if you're paying attention to the news at all right now. So one possible topic here would just be to look at the virus. Why has it spread so far so quickly? What is it about this virus that's been so devastating? Why weren't we more prepared? So that could be your focus. Or you could take a look at a specific problem related to it. Job loss. What do we do about all the people that have lost work? There's a stimulus checks going out now. That's one way to address the problem. Is that a good solution? Some people think the checks are too much. So maybe you feel like they're too little. Also, a lot of people are facing eviction. There's been a suspension on evictions in a lot of places. That's going to eventually end. So what do you do there? A lot of people that are in residential, nursing home residents and other people in institutions can't have visitors. What do you do about that problem? So, and there are also related problems, that there are entire countries that don't have access to a vaccine right now. Even if, we as a society only care about ourselves, maybe that if you don't have everybody vaccinated by a certain point, then the effect of the vaccine on us is actually less. So what do we do about getting everybody vaccinated everywhere? And then a related topic here, vaccine hesitancy. Before COVID, there were people who were reluctant to take vaccines for measles or these other diseases that were essentially eradicated, or at least in the US. But then because of that, there have been these outbreaks. So what do we do about that? There's a group of people, too, that are vaccine hesitant just related to the COVID vaccines. You might sort of think of that as a different category of vaccine hesitancy. And some of those folks say, well, it's so new. How do we know that it's safe? And then there's also people of color in a special category, too. There's some pretty good reasons why, if you're a person of color, you might be more hesitant than other groups of people. So I'll walk you through some other options here. This list that I have here of suggested topics is not exhaustive, meaning if you have an idea for something you want to write about, some kind of global problem or issue, by all means, let's talk about that. Lots of Asian American and Pacific Islander crimes in which people have been singled out because they are members of that group. There was a mass shooting that targeted Asian American women, and the data shows that it's really up something like 30% in the last year as compared with data from the year before that. So what's going on with that? Why are these groups being targeted? Is it COVID related? What can we do about that? Also, gun violence has returned to the news again for some good reasons, or maybe we should call them bad reasons. So there are a lot of issues there. We have the Second Amendment, right? As an American citizen, you have the right to carry a gun, at least, or at least to own one. First of all, gun violence is mostly one-on-one. We tend to kind of forget that, although the incidence of mass shootings in the last 10 years is higher than it used to be. So you could look at the data regarding one-on-one acts of gun violence, or you could focus more on the mass shootings. And you might take a look at one of these examples from Parkland, Florida, Sandy Hook, or Columbine, or you could focus on something more recent. There have been, unfortunately, several recently. As you pick examples, as you select topics, it's worth thinking about if you pick a problem that's occurring right at this moment, where there's not much history to it, it may be hard to find closure and to find, sources that have experts reflecting on the whole situation. If it's something that's just occurred. So these very recent examples might be a little harder to write about. Some of these that are a few years old might be, there might be more material to read about and could shed light on what's happening currently. So you could write about several of these, but it helps to have at least one example, no matter what your topic, that's where you really present it pretty thoroughly in depth. Illegal immigration's in the news too. You know that the previous presidential administration focused on building a wall at the Mexico border, the U.S.-Mexico border. Of course, a lot of people that are coming into the U.S. are asylum seekers. They're not trying to sneak in. They're coming in and presenting themselves voluntarily. So a wall doesn't stop those folks. One option here is to look at what's going on in countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and other countries that are causing people to flee. Some of these folks are fleeing for their lives. So what do we do? Do we just let everybody in? Most people don't think we can really do that. How do you sort through people who have really good reasons to be coming here and those who maybe don't? While we're deciding those things, what do we do with people? Where do we put them? What about kids who arrive without parents, when they're on their own? What do we do with them? So illegal immigration or problems associated with legal immigration too are related. That's a related topic that you might want to look at here. And by the way, these topics are not really in any particular order in this document, except possibly with the recency in the news. That there's a trial going on with this related to this topic here with police use of excessive force. There are several things occurring right now with this one. So this topic is going to really involve looking at a basic question. What do we want as a society? What do we want police to do? What do we want? Why do we have them? What role do we expect them to fulfill? How well are we preparing them to fulfill that role? If they are not fulfilling that role, what do we want to do about it? What should we do about it? And then, there's there are elements of racism that are going to be important too. If you look at this, people of color are disproportionately affected by the negative side of policing. So complex topic. Again, you want to pick one or two really specific examples and present them in depth, and then use those as a way of more generally, what kind of policy decisions do we want to be making here? That whole slogan of defund the police, you probably want to look at that if you're looking at this topic here. Anti-LGBT discrimination. There's right now in the Arkansas state government, there's some legislation pending here. For several years, there's been a lot of progress in this area, and then it's met with some opposition. So you remember that there have been debates about gay marriage way back, and then transgender students participating in sports. Can you participate in the sport of the gender that you identify with? Bathroom access. So there are a lot of important topics related to this one. Again, all these topics, the way they're presented here, are too broad. So your goal, once you've kind of figured out an area you want to write about, is to really hone in, pick one example of it, and then say to yourself, okay, what element of this topic am I really going to be writing about then? What am I going to focus on here? So just a few other things to look at here, and then you have access to this document here. It's called the Research Writing Assignment. It's linked in It's Learning. Georgia just passed a law here about it's going to make it harder for everybody to vote. So every citizen is supposed to have the right to vote, but of course that right doesn't do you any good if you don't have access to voting. If the actual act of voting is impossible for you, so. How are we doing as a society about allowing all citizens to vote, about giving them access? Not too well in some cases. Fake news, you've heard about the influence of Russia, possibly, and the role of Facebook and social media in the spread of fake news. What's happened? Is it worse than it used to be? How come people read stuff and then believe it without really doing any fact-checking here? What's going on there? What's the effect of that? Media literacy is a whole field of study, and it seems that some people, their media literacy skills are inadequate. Threats to democracy, prescription opiate and heroin abuse and addiction, that was in the news a lot pre-COVID. The problem is still there. A lot of people have been prescribed, they'll get prescribed a prescription after an injury or something, they end up addicted. Even though they got it legally initially, they end up addicted. They can't get any more of what they are prescribed initially, and they move to heroin. This happens frequently. So that's an element, that's a topic you might want to look at. Vaping and smoking, we know it's bad for you, right? We know it's bad, and yet a lot of people are doing it. Sexual harassment, sexual abuse. There's some famous court cases here recently in the last 10 years that you could look at here. Sexual assault on college campuses is in here as a separate topic because if you're a victim of a sexual assault on a college campus, chances are it's not going to be handled by the police, at least not initially. The campus police and the campus system are usually that's the first line of justice, if you want to call it. And sometimes that's inadequate. There's some good reasons that it's set up that way, but sometimes it doesn't accomplish the justice that the victims want. High prison populations, high college tuition costs, bias in college admissions, terrorism, Islamophobia, hunger and poverty. This one, this is a global problem. It's also a problem right here in Maplewood. And several years ago, we established the Weekend on Wheels. So one topic you could do is look at hunger and poverty right in this area. And one of the ways to address the problem is the MRH Food Pantry, the Weekend on Wheels program. So that might be, particularly if you're participating in that program, this may be a topic you want to consider. Human trafficking, alcohol abuse and addiction, not hearing about that much in the news recently, but it's still there. Inadequate sex education in public schools, genocide, human rights violations, also a couple other things that might be of interest to you. Cell phones. Are you looking at your phone right now? It's a problem, right? A lot of people have addictions that actually pull them out of, it's a problem because it's it actually interferes with one's ability to sustain long-term engagement in academics. So that may be a topic you want to look at. The incidence of depression and other mental illnesses has increased since COVID, so that's particularly important right now. Antibiotic-resistant illnesses. So think about this. You've got access to this document here, and no matter what you pick here, again, remember that these topics, as they're stated now, are too general. So you want to pick one element of one of these topics or something else that interests you.